everybody, my name is Selena and welcome to the Tea Tree Gully Library for our book launch of A Fey Tale by Carlisle. I want to firstly acknowledge that today we are meeting on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with their land and their ancestors. I'd just like to welcome Roman to the front to introduce Karen.
Thank you for that. I'm one of the conveners of Critical Mass, a monthly group that meets to discuss science fiction and fantasy. And over the years we've had various writers come in to talk to us, and one of them is indeed Karen J Khalil. There are three things you need to know about Karen. She's fond of steampunk, pots of tea, and dark chocolate.
And purple.
And of course the colour purple. Yes. She's an author, convener of the local Tea Scouts. She's one of a current cohort of talented fantasy writers in Australia, including Tansy Rayner Roberts, Angela Slatter, Narelle Harris, Kathleen Jennings, Lisa L. Hannett, Jane Rowley, Lucy Sussex, and many others. Now, Karen's also interested in Sherlock Holmes and has written a few stories in that universe featuring Mrs. Hudson. Mrs. Hudson and the Case of the Forgotten Letter. Mrs. Hudson Investigates. They appeared in the Where's Holmes anthologies, which tell you what happens when Holmes isn't around to solve mysteries. Now, some of you, when wandering around Adelaide, might have noticed a plaque. It's near the car park at the intersection of Pulteney and Rundle. It's a plaque commemorating Conan Doyle's visit to Adelaide back in 1920. At that time, there was much interest in two young English girls who were taking photographs of themselves at play with fairies. A warning. Should you consider doing anything similar, please note, fairies do not play fair. And they are definitely not cute, safe creatures to play with. Do not enter lightly into agreements with the Fae. They can wait a very long time to collect on debts owing. They're powerful and dangerous and cunning to boot. Now, Karen decided Doyle's visit was worth further investigation. Luckily, Aunt Enid was there at the time.
Okay, well, I already had my panic attack. So. Okay, first I'll tell you about, before we do anything else, I'll tell you the tickets. I've got a book door prize, which is an A Fey Tale mug, and you can get an extra ticket for every book you buy. And then we'll do it later. Okay, thank you, Roman. Oh, I'm here, yes. I'm Karen J Carlisle. I'm author and illustrator of Victorian mysteries, steampunk and fantasy. It's on everything I do. Yeah. I met Roman not long after moving to Adelaide in 1988, and you can do the maths on that, and when I discovered the local science fiction fantasy group. And for those, I was going to say about Roman, but basically they've already said about Roman. He's also an active member of Friends of the Earth, where if you read the first Aunt Enid, you know the bees are a big thing in there as well. Okay, I'd also like to thank the Tea Tree Gully Library for hosting the launch. It's the second book in the Aunt Enid Mysteries, and I've been fortunate that this is actually my local library, so that's a bonus as well. And David Brooks, who isn't here now, he was the previous historian. He's now moved on to, I think, Mortlock Library, which is really cool. He actually helped me with some of the research in the book as well. Okay. I'm not very adept at book reading, so I'm not actually doing a book reading today. I hope you read the thing. I'm doing a talk instead of book reading because I get stilted with that. I thought I'd talk about the intriguing, not so commonly known, although we've talked about already, a few facts about Adelaide. I was originally going to do this talk for the official, well, was originally the official book launch of Fey Tale last September, so it would have been September 2020, which was 100 years almost to the day of when Doyle was visiting Adelaide, which was September in 1920. But of course we all know what happened there. So, okay, and also there may be spoilers, so there's not too many really, but it depends on where you pour water. So today I'm concentrating on Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's visit itself, particularly at Humbug Scrub. Some of you probably have been there. And the link to fairies and Adelaide's own fairy doors, which some of you may or may not know about. I've got my little ticket to tell you when to go to the next slide, and I actually forgot to go to the next slide. There you go. Okay. So I've loved Sherlock Holmes since I was at school. The school librarian figured I needed a diet other than science fiction to read, so she introduced me to Naomi Marsh and to Agatha Christie, of course, and to Sherlock Holmes, which was pretty cool. And of course then I went on to Lord of the Rings and everything else, so it really was sort of inevitable that I'd end up putting fantasy and mysteries together. When I first wrote the first book, Aunt Enid Mysteries, I knew that Aunt Enid would meet Sir Conan Arthur Doyle, because there's a little bit of a spoiler, so cover your ears if you don't want to hear it. She's actually older than she looks. That's all I'm going to say. If you've read the first book, you'll know what I mean. And a bit of a giveaway, the first book was set in modern day, and the second book is a prequel set in 1920, so it gives you a bit of a hint about what's going on there. Okay, there's actually a throwaway line in the first book, where this is as much as a reading as you're going to get from me. Alfred looked up from his notes. "This is just like an Agatha Christie novel," he said. "I prefer Sherlock Holmes myself," said Enid. Agnes sighed. "Oh, Arthur was such a nice man." Alfred lifted his pencil from the card and turned to Agnes. "He would have died before you were born, wouldn't he?" Enid glared at Agnes and put a finger to her lip. That's about the little hints. I like putting little Easter eggs in. Okay, the spark for the whole conversation started when I was actually researching another story, Tea Tree Gully history. I live in the area, and I think we've got some pretty cool history here. And that was for a story called Hunted. Yep, there we go. Which was part of the 2016 Fringe event that Tea Tree Gully held. And I was also researching a steampunk story for a Canadian anthology, and I wanted to make it an Australian story. And that was actually involving the Lady Alice mine as well. And of course, while I was doing all this, I rediscovered that Conan Doyle was here, and I got all excited. Okay, so 2 years later, I was actually dropping hints for book 2 into the first book. And now I've lost my place, excuse me. Okay, most of us know that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was the creator of the great detective Sherlock Holmes. And his first story was, Sherlock Holmes' story was his Study in Scarlet, published in 1887. I wrote that down because I knew I'd forget that. What many of you probably don't know is he also wrote science fiction, horror, historicals, stage plays, non-fiction books, military history and crime books. He actually wrote The Case of Oscar Slater, was actually based on real-life investigations, so there was a couple of times he actually did join the police in actual investigations. And he campaigned for the pardon of Mr. Slater for wrongful imprisonment, and in the end he eventually was let out. And this is mentioned in A Fey Tale as well, just in passing. He also had, Doyle also had an interest in spiritualism and in fairies. Now, I think I've got another slide here. Yes. Okay, on the coming of fairies, you can actually buy a copy or get a copy in the library. He discussed the controversial Cottington fairies, which Roman talked about before, which was a series of photographs by the two girls, which were later proved to be fraud. He was definitely certain that they weren't fraud, though. He also did an article in the Strand on fairies photographed. His first lecture on spiritualism was in 1917, and then he wrote several more books after that. And the reason he came to Adelaide was he was doing a tour on it. He wasn't coming for his books, he was actually coming for that tour, and that brought him to Australia and into Adelaide in September 1920. There we go. And was advertised in the paper. And he did 4 lectures, 3 were advertised on the 25th, 27th, 28th, and on the 30th he did a matinee reprise of the pictures of psychic phenomena. He actually had local photographers in that one too. The entire tour took about 4 months and took him through Australia and New Zealand. Adelaide was the first official stop on that tour. He arrived here by ship from Fremantle on September the 21st, 1920, and he stayed at the Grand Central Hotel, which is on the corner of Rundle and Pulteney Streets, where the Hungry Jack's car park is now. So on the left is the hotel, which when I moved here in '88, it had already been demolished in about 75, 76. I wish I'd actually seen the hotel. A lot of people say that it was pretty spiffy. It was actually it was actually built in 1920 on the site of the York Hotel. Sorry, that should be 1910, that's a typo. 1910 on the site of the York Hotel, and as I said, was demolished in 75, 76. In its heyday, it was world renowned as one of the best hotels in the world. It had a winter garden room to relax with a pot of tea, amid exotic ferns, with a live string orchestra, and that's mentioned in books and a few scenes too. One of the characters actually is living because they had residence in the hotel. And it actually had quite a few famous people. So other than Conan Doyle, the then Prince of Wales attended, I think that was about April that year, Dame Nellie Melba, Mark Twain and the Kings. So just for something a bit different. That's pretty cool. The directors, Foy and Gibson, closed the hotel in 1923. The bar, however, was kept open a bit longer, and they let the residents sort of filter out over a period of time. So it was officially closed the following year in 1924. It became the Foy and Gibson's department store, and after the mid-1950s, it was a government building and demolished and with the car park. Unfortunately, the only evidence we have now is the plaque. Now, sometimes when they have events in town, they put big cardboard things over the top of it so you can't see it, so sometimes it's not visible, excuse me. Not COVID, it's allergies. Okay. And it is actually outside, you can see a Hungry Jack's there, and that's how close it is, so if you want to go and find it, that's where you find it. And, excuse me. Okay, so, you can tell I'm nervous, sorry. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle had a whirlwind visit. He visited local vineyards, Penfolds and Hamilton wines. He sampled the wines, witnessed wine production, and he actually described Australian wines as purer than corresponding wines in Europe, especially the champagnes. I'll have to take him on that because I'm a teetotaler. So. Hamilton Newell Wines on their website actually has some information about Doyle's visit, and you can see some photos on there as well. He also attended a small meeting of spiritualists in the hotel sitting room, was entertained to dinner by local Adelaide doctors, and this is a cute little thing I like. He was actually trained as a doctor in Edinburgh and worked as a ship's doctor and an ophthalmologist. So that's a bit of a link there to me as well in my past. And before he retired to write books. And interestingly, if we go back, oh no, that one there. One of the doctors that he had dinner with was called Dr. Watson. I thought that was quite cute. I thought that was pretty cool. Serendipity. He also visited the art gallery and botanical gardens and had lunch with the governor. He visited the South Australian Museum to view Thomas Belchamber's Malleefowl exhibit and visited him at Humbug Scrub Wildlife Sanctuary on the 29th of September. And he later wrote that he wanted to understand the country and its problems because he actually was a supporter of wildlife sanctuaries, which a lot of people don't know about. So, Humbug Scrub, pretty cool. Lady Alice Mine was opened in 1870 and is now known as Humbug Scrub. It was a successful copper, quartz and gold mine. After the mine was depleted, the land was bought by Thomas Payne Belchambers, and he was a noted conservationalist, try to say that in a hurry, and became Humbug Scrub became one of the first wildlife sanctuaries established in Australia. Doyle had read about Thomas Belchambers in a UK magazine and was determined to meet him. So he actually got introduced to Belchambers by one of the local reporters, actually in the hotel lobby of the Grand Hotel. And he described him as a kind-eyed, unkempt man in his 50s with no thought of appearances, but the look and voice which bespeak the gentle soul within. And of course then I had my description for another of the characters in the book, which is pretty cool. In the Adelaide Register article on the 23rd of September, thank you for whoever got me the drink. And he actually discussed the recent droughts they've had in South Australia. There's always droughts happening. My grandma used to always say it was either a drought or a flood. So Doyle was interested in nature and wildlife, so an article about the drought published just after his arrival would have sparked his interest even more in going up to Humbug Scrub. The visit to Humbug Scrub was actually beneficial to Doyle because it advertised his visit, but also to Humbug Scrub because it was desperately in need of funds at the time. And in the 1920s, there actually wasn't a lot of interest in wildlife sanctuaries because it wasn't a real big thing at the time. So Arthur Conan Doyle, there we go, wrote a book, The Wanderings of a Spiritualist, and that actually details his trip and his tour. And he described in chapter 3 of his tour in Adelaide specifically, and actually there were several pages that were dedicated to Thomas Belchambers and Humbug Scrub as well. In all, several articles were written between September and October about or by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. There was one entitled Mr. Belchambers at Home, which was published in the Adelaide Register on the 30th, and it appears to have been rerun on the 2nd of October after he left. He left on the 30th of September. And the second was credited to Rufus, which was the pen name for Ernest Whittington, a well-known writer from the Register, and later the advertiser, who himself was a lover of nature, and he's also in the book as well. There you go. Lots of little side characters that turn up every now and then. Slide number. I think that's the number 2. Yes. On the 7th of October, in Picture of the Week in the Register, was a photo of Doyle visiting Humbug Scrub, and the possum which he's holding apparently had gone into his coat, and he was quite excited by that and thought it was quite cute. I'd actually like now to thank Francesca Zillo, manager of the Archives and Library of South Australia Museum, for assistance in my research. They had an exhibition on Doyle's visit back in 2013, and she actually had to dig back into the files to find out what they had left, so she gave me some information on who attended, and some photos as well. So the museum is cool, like libraries are. Doyle was accompanied to Humbug Scrub by his 2 sons, by Edgar Waite, a zoologist and director of the museum, Evan Kiffin Thomas and his wife, Maisie, Ernest Whittington and his photographer, and Dr. Anderson and Major Alfred Wood, which you can see some of the people there in the second photo. Of course, in my book, Enid Turner, the main character, Olive Oldham and Agnes Farrow also go up to the picnic at Humbug Scrub on that day. They have their reasons. Because that's where they meet the Fae. That's a repeat. Okay. He actually described in the Wanderings of a Spiritualist, the brilliant yellow of the wattle was fading upon the trees, and the paddocks were covered with star-shaped flowers, purple flowers of the knotgrass. This is why I don't do these. And with familiar home flowers. And it was a wild bush for part of the way, but most of the second growth was an account of forest fires as much as the woodman's axe. Belchambers came to guide us, for there was no one to ask upon arrival at these desolate tracks and it's easily to get bush. So they actually, I understand it, they came up through Modbury and out along One Tree Hill Road, I believe, to go up there. So he's actually technically been in Modbury, which is exciting. He also described flying eagle, kangaroos, storks, bowerbirds, insectivore plants, and giant ants, not great ants. Giant ants. Sorry, I ballsed up that joke a bit, didn't I? He was also fascinated by Thomas Belchambers' work in helping to incubate the local malleefowl eggs, and pledged to advertise his efforts in the local paper, which he did. And later he also wrote about the importance of wildlife sanctuaries as well. Interestingly, because of his interest in fairies, which he was doing stuff with the Cottington fairies at the time, and his spiritualism, he actually did ask, and it's been in his book and mentioned in the Register as well, and you can see them on Trove, you can go find those articles on Trove. He actually said to Mr. Belchambers, "You are a man living close to nature, do you ever see any fairies?" He actually asked him that, and of course Belchambers replied that he hadn't. So Humbug Scrub provides the link between Doyle's visit in the book and the fairies in the story as well. See, there's a reason for all this. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle went on to visit Melbourne, travelled through Australia and New Zealand, and in February 1921 actually returned to Adelaide and then home on the SS Naldera boat and ship. Okay, fairy doors. Has anyone actually seen the fairy doors yet? Okay, so Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Humbug Scrub and fairies all make an appearance in A Fey Tale. Why the combination? Well, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle had written stories about fairies. He'd asked Thomas Bell Chambers at Humbug Scrub about fairies. There are stories about strange lights in the area up at Humbug Scrub, and The Haunts of Adelaide is a website written by Alan Tiller, which is the Port Adelaide historian at the moment for the library there, and he's written about those as well. And I thought, oh, strange lights, fairies, this is pretty cool. And there was also an article written in 1927 actually linking all three, and the name of that was Humbug Scrub, Sir Conan Doyle's Fairies. Now, how can you not get them all together? So for the intrepid explorers out there, you may have spotted some around, obviously none of you have. Not long after I moved to Adelaide, I was wandering down Rundle Street and looking for those coins that are stuck in the ground, and I actually saw this little door, 3D door, sitting on this corner of what used to be a dress boutique. I think the shop has changed during COVID. I haven't been in town since then. So, and I thought, well, what's going on here? So I went looking, and apparently it's a thing. There are some in Brisbane, there's some in different cities around the world, and we've got our own. And back in 2019, when I was writing the first book, A Fey Tale, I remembered the fairy doors, and I thought, oh, they can become a plot in the next story. I've usually got a bit of a germ of the next story in my head. I've already got an idea of what's happening for book 3, and so I can sort of drop hints in the first book and the next book. And I've dropped some hints in this book, if you can pick them out. I won't tell you. So I remembered them, and I decided that in Fey Tale they were going to become portals to other worlds. So I have this overall arching thing for my stories that it's like multiverses. You've got all these different other worlds that can access into ours through thin places, and the fairy doors are one of those. So from sketchy articles I'd actually read and verbal anecdotes, it seemed that there's probably several doors scattered around Adelaide CBD. No one really knows exactly when they arrived. Their local legends and rumours suggest maybe the 1880s or early 1900s. So they were sort of a bit like a Victorian sculpture Banksy, I suppose, of the day, if they were then. And every few years I went searching, but I couldn't find anything else, and there's not much in the State Library either. More recently, I read at a possible second remaining door somewhere in the vicinity of the Coffee Branch Cafe in Lee Street. I drove around town. We went in that little gap in COVID where you were allowed to go around places, and we went down there, couldn't find it, and since then I found out. So I skipped one, didn't I? So this is the one in Rundle Street. Everyone knows, well, a lot of people know this one. It's a well-known one, and it's down there. There's actually a drawing of that in the book too. So in the paperback you get some artwork I've done, and in the ebook you don't get the artwork. It's just really hard to put artwork in the ebooks. Okay, so this is the one that was down Lee Street, and apparently it has been destroyed. Oh. That's the problem. A lot of these have actually been destroyed. Deb Williams of the Help Save South Australia's History from Demolition Facebook group. It's a big mouth. Has been very helpful in filling in some of the blanks. At the beginning of the year, there was one off Gawler Place, one down Tam O'Shanter Place. Unfortunately, these have been vandalised and destroyed as well, unfortunately. Deb has been working with the National Trust to try to preserve these quirky pieces of art. And as a result, I'm actually sworn not to say the exact places where they are, so that they can try to preserve them. I know where they are. You can have a chat to if you want to. But there is one, I'm allowed to say, there's one on Rundle Street, there's one on Malt Terrace, and there's one off Rundle Street. Okay, if you see them, don't go telling everyone, because they actually have had 3 of them destroyed in just over COVID, which is really not nice. New evidence. Since I've finished writing A Fey Tale, we've got some new evidence. Someone actually went pouring through Google Maps, and it looks like the one in Rundle Street, which is the one down here on the right. was probably not there prior to 2007, but it was definitely visible after the 2013 one. Some of the other ones, it's a little bit different to the other ones. The other ones are all sort of arched and different, so, but who cares, because they're a bit of fun, and you know, you can go around and try and look for them, yeah, but don't let anyone destroy them. Okay, I'd also like to share this last bit of Adelaide history. I want to thank John Crook and Matthew Lombard of the Birdwood Motor Museum. People are really amazingly helpful when you say, I'm writing a book, can you please help me? And I was going to go up to the Birdwood Motor Museum, but again, COVID. I'm in several risk groups, so I can't get out as much as I'd like. I'm sitting here shaking at the moment. And they supplied information on their 1919 Lincoln Tourer, which in red, it's the same, that's what Enid's car in this book is based on. And they tracked down the handbook that was supplied, which is actually just one sheet of paper. They assumed that you knew how to do it, which is went through a couple of the electronics and stuff like that. And they answered detailed questions, including what does it sound like when it drives, and how do you do the windscreen wiper, and really weird things like this. And they even took photographs, so they actually took these photographs for me and sent them to me during the lockdowns. And another little tidbit, imagine my surprise when I discovered that the motor car was donated to the museum by a family named Turner. Yeah, I was like, So yeah, okay, so that's the talk for today. I'm sorry I've probably gone fast because I am really nervous up here. But I just wanted to share those things because we've got some really cool history in Adelaide that we don't even know about, and there's lots of history I'm discovering and doing steampunk books and all sorts of things, and I'm trying to set more books in Adelaide in various time zones and different worlds and stuff like that. Okay, I talked about the door prize. Okay, so I've got copies of A Fey Tale, obviously, down there at the table, and I can sign them for you, and I've got copies of my other books if you're interested in those as well. If you like ebooks, they're purchased online. I believe A Fey Tale's up on Smashwords now. It'll be on a whole lot of other places as well. And I do have some digital copies on card for people of some of the steampunk books, and you can support me on Patreon and buy me a cup of tea on Ko-fi as well. And I want to thank you all for coming. It's actually more people than I thought was going to come, so that's probably why I'm really nervous up here. There you go. That's some of my other books there. It's my steampunk books. And Ko-fi. Okay, so I want to thank Roman again for the introduction. David Brooks and Selena of the Tea Tree Gully, and Simon and everyone else. I know some of them personally, so they've been really, really great for the launch, and the many generous people who assisted in my research. My own dear heart for being one of my alpha readers and doing all the IT when I say help and supporting me, and Sharon, my fellow editor, and I noticed that Katie's here, she's one of my writing group people as well. And thank you all for coming. So hopefully that made sense.